A new girl walks into a school full of strangers, expecting nothing more than a fresh start. But what happens when those strangers decide she doesn't belong? Will she let their hate define her, or will she prove them all wrong? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Sierra James stood at the entrance of Brookstone High, her hands curled into fists inside the front pocket of her hoodie. A deep breath, and then another. The building loomed larger than her old school, but that wasn't what made her stomach twist into tight, uneasy knots. It was the eyes, the way they stared. She could feel them, cold and calculating, studying her, judging her. A group of girls huddled near the flagpole, whispering behind manicured hands. At the center of them stood a tall blonde girl, her smirk slow and deliberate as her gaze raked over Sierra like she was sizing her up. Sierra let it slide. She was used to this. New school, new people, same old looks. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, the leather creaking softly under the weight of her books. She'd been here before, the only black girl in the room. The hushed conversations as she walked past. The way some people hesitated before speaking to her, like they weren't sure she was supposed to be there. It wasn't new. It wasn't anything she hadn't already survived. Just get through the day. That was the plan. No drama, no trouble, no fights. The hallways were crammed with students, voices blending into a chaotic hum of laughter, gossip, and locker doors slamming shut. Sierra moved quickly, slipping past clusters of kids who barely noticed her. The air reeked of cheap perfume, body spray, and cafeteria food. She kept her head down, her fingers tightening around the crumpled schedule in her hand. First period, English, room 312. She found it easily enough. But before she could step inside, a voice stopped her. "Hey, new girl." Sierra turned. The blonde girl from outside was leaning against the lockers, arms crossed, that same smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Two other girls flanked her, one with fiery red hair and sharp green eyes, the other with sleek dark waves that brushed just past her shoulders. "I'm Brooklyn," the blonde said, her voice saccharine sweet, too sweet, like syrup poured over something rotten. "You lost." Sierra said nothing. She'd met girls like Brooklyn before. They didn't throw punches. They didn't need to. They used words, whispers, and laughter to cut deeper than any fist ever could. Brooklyn's smirk widened. "Then why are you just standing there?" Sierra held her gaze, unreadable. The redhead giggled. "Maybe she doesn't talk," she suggested, mockingly. The other girl snorted. "Or maybe she's just slow." Sierra exhaled slowly through her nose, feeling the familiar heat rise in her chest. Not today. She wasn't going to let them win, not on the first day. Without a word, she turned and walked into the classroom. Brooklyn's laugh followed her in. Sierra found an empty seat near the window and sank into it, willing herself invisible. She wasn't in the mood for more introductions, more fake smiles from kids who had already decided she wasn't one of them. She had barely pulled out her notebook when someone slid into the seat beside her. "Don't let them get to you," a voice whispered. Sierra glanced over. A girl with warm brown eyes and dark curls, pulled into a ponytail, gave her a small, knowing smile. "I'm Layla," she said. Sierra hesitative, then nodded. "Sierra." Layla grinned. "Yeah, I know. Everybody does." Brooklyn made sure of that. Sierra sighed, her fingers twitching against the spiral-bound edge of her notebook. Layla leaned in. "She's just mad you exist." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" Layla smirked. "Because you don't care." Before Sierra could reply, the bell rang. The teacher started the lesson, but Sierra barely listened. Her mind was already counting the minutes until she could leave this place. Lunch was worse. It always was. The cafeteria buzzed with unspoken rules. Where you sat mattered. Who you sat with mattered even more. Sierra grabbed her tray and kept moving, not stopping long enough for anyone to tell her she wasn't welcome. She found an empty table near the back and sat down. She poked at the pile of mush on her plate that was supposed to be pasta. A shadow fell over her. "I wouldn't sit here if I were you," a voice said. Sierra didn't even look up. "Is that a warning or a threat, Brooklyn?" she asked, her voice cool. Brooklyn chuckled and slid into the seat across from her like she owned the place. Jessica and Taylor, her two shadows, followed, grinning like they were in on some private joke. "You tell me," Brooklyn said, tilting her head. "You're new here, so maybe you don't get how things work. There's a system, a pecking order." Sierra stabbed her fork into the pasta. "Sounds exhausting." Jessica scoffed. "She thinks she's funny." Brooklyn leaned forward, her voice dropping just enough to be heard over the cafeteria's noise. "You don't belong here." Sierra met her gaze, unbothered. "Then I guess you'll just have to deal with it." Something flickered in Brooklyn's eyes. A crack in the mask. Sierra had seen it before. That moment when a bully realized their tricks weren't working. Brooklyn recovered quickly. Her smirk returned. "We'll see." She grabbed Sierra's milk and tipped it, letting the white liquid spill across the table. Jessica and Taylor laughed as they stood and walked away. Sierra watched the milk soak into the sleeve of her hoodie. She could feel eyes on her, waiting, watching, seeing how she would react. She grabbed a napkin, wiped herself off, picked up her tray, dumped it, and walked out of the cafeteria. Not angry, not embarrassed, just done. And that was what bothered Brooklyn the most. That night, Sierra lay on her bed, earbuds in, drowning out the world. The events of the day played on a loop in her head, but she refused to let them settle in. She wouldn't give Brooklyn the satisfaction. A soft knock sounded at her door. "You okay, kid?" her father asked. David James stood in the doorway, arms crossed, sharp eyes studying her. He always knew when something was off. Sierra shrugged. Same old, same old." David leaned against the doorframe. "That bad already?" She hesitated, then sat up. "It's just this girl. Thinks she runs the school." David smirked. That type." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed. "What's her deal?" "Sierra Saif. Rich. Popular. Blonde. Hangs with her little minions. Thinks she's untouchable." David chuckled. "Sounds like every villain from every bad teen movie." Sierra shook her head, but the weight in her chest didn't lift. "I don't even care about her," she admitted. "It's the way everyone else just goes along with it. Like they believe her crap." David nodded slowly. "People like that feed off reactions. You don't give them what they want, they lose their power." Sierra exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I didn't. She tried to humiliate me, and I walked away." "Smart," David said. "Yeah, well, now she's pissed." David stood. "Come on." Sierra frowned. "Where?" He raised an eyebrow. "The garage." She groaned but followed him. The garage was their gym. Heavy bag hanging from a ceiling. Mats rolled out across the floor. It smelled faintly of sweat and old leather. She'd been training with her dad since she was 10. At first, it was for fun. Later, she understood it was for survival. "Hands up," David said. Sierra tightened the worn straps of her boxing gloves and raised her fists. "Footwork," he instructed. "Light on your toes." She moved, shifting her weight, her muscles remembering the rhythm. "When people push you," David said, tapping her arm, "they expect you to push back. But you wait. Let them waste their energy." He threw a slow punch. She ducked, stepping aside. And when the moment's right, he finished. "You make your move. Sierra has me to give." Yeah. I know." David held up the mitts. "Then show me." She threw a jab. Then another. "Quick. Controlled." "Good," he said. "But you're holding back." Sierra's eyes narrowed. She knew what he was doing. David lowered the mitts. "What's the real reason you walked away from that girl today?" "Sierra Exalith." "Because it's not worth it. That all." Her jaw clenched. She looked away. "No." David stepped closer. "You weren't scared, were you?" "No," she said immediately. "Then what?" Her hands tightened into fists inside the gloves. "Because I know what happens when a black girl fights back." Silence. David's expression softened. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "But don't ever let that stop you from defending yourself." Sierra swallowed hard. "I'm not letting her win." "Good," David said. He motioned to the heavy bag. "Now hit." She did. And this time, she didn't hold back. The next day, Sierra walked into Brookstone with her head high. She found Layla by her locker. "You good?" Layla asked. "Yeah, Sierra Plaith." "You?" Layla hesitated. "Depends. You check your phone yet?" Sierra frowned and pulled it out. A message from an unknown number. It was a picture of her in the cafeteria. The caption read, "Poor little lost girl. Can't even fight for her seat." Sierra exhaled slowly. "She's desperate," she said. Layla gave her a sideways glance. "This isn't normal." "It is for people like her," Sierra replied. But when she opened her locker, she stopped cold. Her books were gone. In their place was a single banana. Her stomach dropped. She stared at it, the message behind it loud and clear. Slowly, she closed the locker. Turned. Brooklyn was standing at the end of the hall, smiling. Jessica and Taylor giggled beside her. Sierra walked past them. "Oops," Brooklyn said as she passed. "Guess someone forgot their lunch." Laughter followed her down the hall. Sierra clenched her jaw so tight it hurt. By lunchtime, Sierra had made up her mind. She grabbed her tray and walked straight to the same table she sat at yesterday. Brooklyn's table was in her line of sight. For a moment, everything was normal. Students ate, talked, laughed. Then Sierra reached in her bag, pulled out a banana, peeled it slowly, and took a long, deliberate bite. Her eyes never left Brooklyn's. The cafeteria went silent. Brooklyn's grin twitched. Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. Sierra caught it. And just like that, the game changed. Brooklyn wasn't done. If anything, Sierra's refusal to break made things worse. Layla caught up with her between classes. "She's planning something," she warned. "I'm not running," Sierra said. After school, Sierra stepped into the courtyard. Students were already gathered, phones out, recording. Brooklyn waited. Jessica and Taylor beside her. Sierra kept walking. "Yo, new girl," Brooklyn called. "You forgot something." Brooklyn held up Sierra's hoodie. The one from her locker that morning. She dropped it on the pavement. The crowd laughed. Sierra took a breath. "Steady." Brooklyn took a step closer. "You always act so tough," she said. "But we all know you're not." Jessica snickered. "Bet she won't even pick it up." Sierra bent down. Not to pick up the hoodie, but to tie her shoe. A hush settled over the crowd. Brooklyn's smirk faltered. "What the hell are you doing?" "Sierra stood." "What does it look like?" Brooklyn's face reddened. She was losing control. "You're just gonna walk away?" Sierra met her gaze. "Yeah." Brooklyn lunged, grabbing Sierra's backpack and yanking her back. Sierra stomped down on Brooklyn's foot. Hard. Brooklyn yelped, loosening her grip. Sierra twisted free, stepping back to keep her balance. Brooklyn's eyes burned. "So you do want to fight?" "I don't want to fight you," Sierra said. But Brooklyn charged anyway. Sierra si deste pez. Effortless. Brooklyn stumbled. The crowd roared. Brooklyn whipped around, furious. She swung a wild punch. Sierra ducked, stepped behind her, too close now. Brooklyn froze. "We're done here," Sierra said quietly. And she walked away. Brooklyn didn't follow. The school was different after that day. The whispers still followed Sierra down the halls. But they weren't mocking anymore. They were curious, respectful, maybe even a little afraid. Brooklyn, Jessica, and Taylor weren't in their usual spots. Their power was slipping. Everyone knew it. Layla smirked. "You're kind of famous now." Sierra's chiragd. "That wasn't the plan." "Still worked," Layla said, loud and clear. At lunch, Sierra didn't sit alone. Layla sat beside her. Other students joined. No apologies. But it was something. Brooklyn walked in late. Her confidence gone. She met Sierra's eyes, then looked away first. Weeks passed. Sierra belonged now, and she knew it. One afternoon, she found Brooklyn waiting by her locker. Jessica and Taylor were nowhere in sight. "I need to talk to you," Brooklyn said quietly. They walked to an empty hallway. "I was wrong," Brooklyn admitted. "I thought if I controlled everything, no one could make me feel small." She shrugged. "Guess I made other people feel small instead." Sierra crossed her arms. "That's a you problem." Brooklyn laughed bitterly. "Yeah." She sighed. "I know I can't undo it. I'm not asking for forgiveness." She met Sierra's gaze. "I just wanted you to know. I get it now. And I'm sorry." Sierra studied her. She didn't know if Brooklyn meant it. But it wasn't her problem. "Good luck with that," she said. Brooklyn didn't stop her as she walked away. That night, Sierra trained with her dad. Her jabs sharper. Her cross cleaner. David smiled. "School getting easier?" Sierra thought about it, about the whispers fading, the weight lifting. She threw another punch and smiled. Yeah, she said, it is.